Coming up, should the battle at inside linebacker be a good thing for the New York Football Giants as McFadden gets the nod, at least right now, from Wink Martindale? What are the expectations for the outside cornerback position? And with a contract potentially coming this season, we get news around Xavier McKinney and where his extension stands, all coming up next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast, my boy Doug Norrie, and your New Jersey Devils and the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. Oh, we thank you for coming in on the podcast, as we're joined, as always, by the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the generational season ticket holder for Big Blue, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I'm doing good, Adam. I want to hear more about you today. How are you feeling, my friend?
Dude, I feel great, man. A lot of things happening in the background, trying to get it all together. I tell you one thing, as you get older, sleep matters. It's good to get a solid, you want to get your solid 8 in there if you can. And this comes from a guy who doesn't have kids yet, but I notice the toll that it takes when I don't get that beauty rest.
Sleep? What's that? I can't. I don't even know what that is, Adam. So having a young child at home, I don't think you really get much of that these days.
I like to always reference my brother who has 3 kids, all under the age of 6, living the dream. Anywho, as we talk about the New York Football Giants, because that's what people really care about, some interesting things coming out of that first preseason game. We came in on Monday, obviously, and discussed takeaways, what we want to see this week, and some of the areas of concern, like the depth of the offensive line. But we had Wink Martindale come out and say, yeah, as of right now, I've got McFadden inside track to be the starting inside linebacker alongside Bobby Okereke. I'm going to let you give your reaction first here, because I think that my take is fairly dismissive, and I don't know, maybe it's not accurate, but I have a fairly strong and mostly dismissive take around the idea that McFadden, no knock on him, is going to be the starting inside linebacker come week 1.
Well, you know what? The initial knee-jerk reaction is, well, we thought Darian Beavers was going to be the guy. Like, he was slated to be the guy last year. Why is he not slated to be the guy this year? And, the more I've kind of absorbed it, the initial reaction, I mean, it does make sense, right? With Darian Beavers coming off an injury, he still really hasn't shown that he's back to the level that he was prior to the injury. We all hope that he is and expect he is. But coming off an ACL injury, a knee injury, it still takes time to get back. And Micah McFadden played last year. He's been around. The team has moved him inside a little bit more to be able to say, like, this is a position that we could see you play. So I guess I'm not surprised. It's McFadden's to lose because he was active and available last season and during the offseason and during training camp. So, like, for me, I guess it's McFadden, you have it until Darian Beavers shows us otherwise.
I think, well, that's kind of okay. So my dismissive take is, and if you go and watch, we talked about this coming out of the preseason game, that we liked what we saw from some of the linebackers, McFadden included. But if you go back and watch the tape, and I mentioned it at the back end of it, saying also there's areas where they get exposed inside of a Wink Martindale system, right? Especially in coverage. That is not going to be Micah McFadden's strong suit. Some people have even thought about him as saying, what's his ceiling? Maybe like a Blake Martinez, right? This downhill speeding bullet, great for wrapping up tacklers. He missed some gap assignments too. And none of this, by the way, is a knock on him. I like him. But if I look at these two players, I view McFadden as being the great depth piece that you have in the linebacking room that comes in and serves a more specified function, whereas Darian Beavers, at least on paper, because he hasn't been out there performing after the injury, he has the skill set, the measurables, everything indicates that he can be a starting inside linebacker inside of this system. So, I mean, I guess I just took it as like, yeah, he hasn't played. He came in camp. He's looked good so far. He's still absorbing the playbook. I still look at this as it's a matter of when, not if, Darian Beavers is named the starter. If anything, we know Wink Martindale. I think that this is just a little bit of Wink Martindale doing the work, saying, hey, yeah, right now I give it to Micah McFadden. Feel free, Darian. Feel free at any point to claim your spot here and show up and make some plays.
I'll take it a step further. I think it's Wink Martindale rewarding McFadden for the offseason work that he's done. It's like,
sure,
the guy's been training hard, working hard, taking instruction. The Giants say they like all the things that he's done. And so this is kind of like the nod to say, you've been working hard, you've been busting your butt to be able to be out there. We're going to give you the first opportunity. And if you continue to play well and you continue to look good, like, it's tough to keep you off the field. So that's one piece of it. But Adam, there's one more thing that I've been thinking about a lot in all of this
Okay.
is that the way that Wink Martindale plays defense, there's going to be so many different lineups and formations that are going to be happening. There's a world where McFadden, maybe Beavers, and Okereke can be on the field at the same time. We talk about the rotation in the secondary, in the safety position. There may be times where Dane Belton, Xavier McKinney, and Jason Pinnock are all on the field at the same
Mhm.
time. So I don't know if he really is too concerned about like who's the starter when we're a few weeks out from the regular season. I think this is a, hey, you earned it in the offseason. You at least have the right at first refusal. Make Darian Beavers beat you on the field.
That makes sense too. And by the way, we've even heard some things coming out where Bobby Okereke has been the only linebacker on the field. So there's also the world
Right.
where they're going with a very secondary heavy lineup and they're looking to create some different looks here. And ultimately, to your point, though, Wink Martindale and at least the state of where this defense is right now, and we're going to talk about the secondary and the outside cornerback situation in a second too. It does need to still be fluid. There are guys that show some flashes that have skill sets we think are developable. Even players like Tre Hawkins, he's going to have his struggles, right? Even a guy like Deonte Banks, who looked better in that preseason game, he's a rookie. There's going to be struggles here. So I think a part of this is good to remember that even a second-year guy like McFadden, still just a second-year guy, right? So there's a lot of developmental components to a lot of these players, which actually probably is why getting Bobby Okereke was so important for the Giants this offseason. Veteran, stable, knows the NFL, knows how to play the position, and hopefully can teach a lot of these guys too, right? Like without him in the room, we saw what the hodgepodge looked like last year. It was a bit of a mess. And we're talking about dudes that may not even be on rosters this year playing substantial downs last season.
Yeah, you're talking about guys like Jalen Smith, like Landon Collins, that might not even be signed on another roster, getting significant snaps and reps for this team. It's good that there's a little bit of a battle next to Okereke because
Yeah.
prior to this, it was Blake Martinez maybe retiring to sell Pokemon cards, or it could have been McFadden and Beavers are hopefully starting, and who's playing behind them? Is it Cam Brown or not? It's a better position for the Giants to be in. This is something we've talked about before: is how can Joe Shane continue to get this depth added to some of these areas of need, like inside linebacker for the Giants?
You better believe it, man. Turning our attention then over to the cornerback room and what maybe is an evolving plan here. We find it fascinating. We saw and have heard and continue to see that Adoree Jackson is being used as a slot corner. And over the last like week or so, we said, is that based on what everybody else isn't doing or on what we think Adoree Jackson's value could be going into this? When I look at it, Tre Hawkins emerging, okay, you like him as an outside corner, obviously. Deonte Banks, he's viewed as that as a sole function. We saw Cordell Flock getting some outside reps now, too. Do you want to paint this as a positive picture that the development of these younger players and what they project them for and just what their roles are going to be affords Wink Martindale to take Adoree Jackson, move him to the slot? Or the darker timeline of this is that, as we've said before, I didn't expect Adoree Jackson to be here long term, right? Because he's not on the right age timeline. Is this maybe trying to get like one step ahead of an outside corner that could take a marginal step back at some point? And you just want to see if he can function in some different areas of this defense.
So, Adam, I'm going to take door number 3 on this one. And,
Oh,
and it may surprise you where I'm taking this, but
all
what
right.
I think the Giants are realizing really quickly is, man, we have to get our 3 best cornerbacks on the field no matter what. We don't have a
Yep.
choice, right? And when you look at it, I always say follow the money, follow the height measurements on this one, Adam, which will tell you a
Yeah.
lot more than you realize. You have someone like Tre Hawkins who's come out of nowhere as a late round draft pick. He's 6'3". Doesn't really make much sense to put him in the slot, right? But he's been
Mhm.
playing well enough where you want him to get some outside reps. You want him to be on the field. Then you look at Deonte Banks, your first round draft pick, your Mr. Athleticism. He is 6'1". He is a taller guy. He is not going to play in the slot either. So by moving Adoree Jackson, who's 5'11", some people say 5'10", and he has the veteran leadership and the athleticism to stay on the field, you're basically saying, what is the way that I can get my 3 best cornerbacks on the field? This is the scenario that I think Wink Martindale is realizing gives him the best chance to do that.
That's a really good way to take it. I like that, right? Let's just get the best value on there. But I'll add, I guess what I would add in then is that Cordell Flott is not necessarily, at least in camp so far, taking the next incremental step forward because the idea the idea that Deonte Banks and that Tre Hawkins, maybe more specifically, right? Hey, listen, guys come out of nowhere, you love it. But the fact that they're able to elevate themselves just on, doesn't matter where you're playing, the best players we have available, that those two guys clearly are rising above Cordell Flott, and then forcing the Giants to say, well, where else could Adoree play? Because he's our best cornerback. Could he play a little bit of slot for us? That'd be nice. And then there's going to be scheme versatility here. There's going to be zone looks. There's going to be blitz packages that they want to run here. But overall, I at least think that it has to be a mild concern, I'm going to say, that nobody claimed the slot corner role significantly enough where it could be, hey, let's see how this unfolds here. Now, by the time we get to week one, maybe it is. Adoree Jackson and Deonte Banks are starting, and Tre Hawkins is right there ready to come in and play a big role, and Cordell Flott claims it right in the slot. But right now, it's at least introducing more questions than I thought they had, as opposed to cementing more answers.
Well, so let me ask you a question though. So Darnay Holmes is listed as, or has been on the depth chart listed as the number one slot nickel cornerback for the Giants. To
Right.
me, this is a clear indication of, Wink Martindale saying Tre Hawkins has outplayed Darnay Holmes so far. He has. And if I want to get my three best cornerbacks on the field, the only way to do that is to move Adoree Jackson into the slot. Like there's no other way around it because Tre Hawkins isn't going to play the nickel corner. That's just not
Sure.
what he is at 6'3". So when Wink Martindale says Tre Hawkins has played better than Darnay Holmes, Tre Hawkins has played better than Cordell Flott so far. Like if
Yeah.
that's the case, this is the only configuration of cornerbacks that keeps Adoree Jackson, Deonte Banks, and Hawkins on the field.
I get it. I get it. And I'm excited about Tre Hawkins, but there's not a lot of teams in the NFL that take their starting best cornerback and say, we're going to try you at the slot to get our best collection of talent onto the field. Like some guys are untouchable, right? Like I'm trying to think of what would be the comparable. It'd be like on the offensive line saying, well, even though even though we have a Michael Schmidt's clearly pegged in there, he's your starting center. But the best version might be if we play you at guard and then we put Bredesen at center. And then, you know what I mean? And you start to go, well, okay, like, yeah, the best full five guys, I could see it. But at the same time, you know that you're taking your best player at the highest position and moving him out of it. And that there's some sense that that's what's happening here.
I've got one fun fact for you. Let's
All right.
also consider that some of the slot receivers that the Giants are going to play are the number one wide receiver for the team that they play for. You may say,
Oh,
well, that
100%.
doesn't
Right, right.
But here's a perfect example. Week 1, who is the best wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys against the New York Giants?
Geez, I'd like to go something on a deep cut here, but I'm going to go with CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, I think that's a good guess. Even though they acquire Brandon Cooks and they have Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb is still the
Gonna
guy.
go. Yeah.
And last season, CeeDee Lamb had 594 snaps in the slot and 523 snaps out wide, according to Pro Football Focus. So when you're talking about who's playing in the slot, we're not necessarily saying like, oh, Adoree, cover the number 3, and Tre Hawkins, you're now stuck on a number
Right,
1 like CeeDee
right.
Lamb. We're saying it's a way for all three to get on the field. And also, these other teams have number 1 type wide receivers that will be lining up in the slot so Adoree Jackson can face them.
Yeah, you can talk about Devonta Smith too if you want, where he's going to line up for the Eagles, obviously. And by the way, to kind of crystallize your point, really what it's about is, because I think this will likely be a scenario as well. Follow your matchup, right? If Adoree Jackson is on the field, it means that if CeeDee Lamb wants to go from the slot to the outside, he can travel with him, right? You don't have to pass off these assignments. And then the trickle-down effect of the second and third best wide receivers, those will go ahead and get matched up with Tre Hawkins, with Deonte Banks, with whoever else is going to be out there on the field. So I do wonder if ultimately, maybe that's a really good way to look at this, that Wink Martindale, regardless of everybody else, is just saying, Adoree Jackson, you are our best cornerback. I need to confirm that I can just kind of have you follow whoever we want on a given down and distance, line up in different positions and be comfortable with them. So you don't walk out there week 1 or week 2 and say, hey, go over to the slot. And he's like, well, I mean, it's been 12 years, Pop Warner football last time that I was lined up in that position, but sure. Right. So a little bit of like positional familiarity is a good thing too. Let's see how that unfolds here. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just an interesting thing for the New York Football Giants. The other little note here, as we're staying on the defensive side of the ball, is Xavier McKinney. It came out, Joe Shane, saying we're probably gonna wait to work on the contract for Xavier McKinney. Some people said, okay, come see us at the trade deadline. Do that little bit of wiggle room when you can start negotiating contracts. How do you feel about where Xavier McKinney is in the pecking order of getting paid? Because part of me feels like he's a stud and we know it, and he keeps growing and he's the versatile weapon you need back there. And then the other part of me looks at where that market goes and what the cost is going to be there. And I do wonder with a Pinnock, with a Belton, right? Just how does the Giant organization view Xavier McKinney in terms of cost and then production? Because they just went through this, I think, very similarly when we talk about Saquon Barkley, right? They're not going to overpay relative to what they feel like the position should be.
So this is an interesting one because I have felt like Xavier McKinney is a cornerstone. He can be a leader on this team, but we say he can, and I feel like we're still waiting for Xavier McKinney to reach that next level with the Giants. And Adam, it's been 3 years so far. Xavier
Yeah.
McKinney, he's not a rookie anymore. He's not 21 years old. It's been 3 years. And listen, year one, he didn't play all the games. Obviously, he was injured coming into it. Giants kind of knew that. He only played in 6 games. 2021, he played awesome. He played all 17 games, started in 16 of them, was great for the Giants. But then last year, obviously, he had that injury where he goes to Mexico and he's riding an ATV and he breaks his hand as the thing flips over. And Xavier McKinney misses more games. So
Mhm.
he's basically he missed 8 games last season and 10 games in his rookie year. Over 3 seasons, he's had a bunch of injuries. And so the Giants need to be smart about this. The franchise tag costs $14 million
Yep.
for a safety, which is expensive. We talk about the running back market being a pretty good deal on the franchise tag, which is why Josh Jacobs and Saquon and others are getting it. Man, the safety position is a little bit interesting. Xavier McKinney's been a little bit injured. He's been a little bit careless and reckless, hasn't been on the field. And even when he was on the field, Pro Football Focus gave him a 55 rating last year, didn't have any interceptions. He needs to take the next step up and be the vocal guy in the secondary in order to deserve that contract. I think Joe Shane's sitting there at him thinking, like, let's take a look at what happens before the bye week before we commit long term.
I think so too, right? And by the way, it can just come out and he can look like a stud, and it's all great, right? And none of this
Right.
matters, and you're happy to pay him. You look over at some of the contracts and just remember the Derwin James, these are AAVs, 19 million, 18 million for Fitzpatrick with the Steelers, north of 17 million for Jamal Adams, which some people could or could not say is regrettable for the Seahawks when they decided to make that move. Marcus Williams, 14 million, 16 million on the books there for Jesse Bates the third with Atlanta. Like, it's significant money. And if you have all the other pieces checked, or you feel like you have young players that are controllable, then spending money over a 3 and 4 year contract can make a lot of sense. But the Giants are still going to have holes beyond this season, and there's some big money that's going to come off the books. They're going to continue to fix the bad bookkeeping of Dave Gettleman. But I do think you're right. Like Pinnock, you pick him up out of nowhere, and he comes in, just looks competent last year, and now in this camp, it looks like he's really starting to shine. Would you like to see Dane Belton really take a big step forward in year 2? Of course. Big things that I'm going to put into McKinney's corner is that he also was underneath new coaching, right? You also have Wink Martindale giving you a new structure, a new dynamic, wanting him to take on a much larger role. You mentioned the injuries. He's got to be healthy. He's got to be highly productive. And when we talk about this defense this season, I think McKinney has to be one of the first 3 names that you mentioned. And if he's anything below that, doesn't mean that he won't have a good year, but I think it definitely sets the table for saying, yes, very talented player, very valuable player. But we have to look in behind and realize the other names that are going to be coming down the pike here in terms of contracts.
Well, keep in mind, Jason Pinnock is also under team control next season for the Giants, and he's
Yeah.
under control at $1 million. Adam, that's like if he continues to build his resume the way that he has in the preseason, and even shown flashes last season, he's going to be a bargain next year.
Yeah.
You have Dane Belton under control. But Nick McLeod's on the roster right now. Maybe you re-sign him. There are ways that the Giants may be able to manipulate this to be able to make it work without Xavier McKinney and not having to spend $15 million a year annually on a 4-year deal to be able to keep him. And I'll say one more thing. We might have said the same thing going into last season about Julian Love and said
Sure.
he's got to be re-signed. And at the end of the day, guess what? He wasn't. The Giants let him go. It was too rich for what they wanted to do. And guys like Dane Belton and Jason Pinnock are already showing that they might be able to fill in for the guy that maybe last season people thought was going to get re-signed too.
And don't forget, again, he is not a Joe Shane guy, right? He is a holdover, and we've seen it kind of go down the middle here, right? Some players have stayed on, some players like Daniel Jones have gotten big contract extensions, some guys have been let go. We talked about how Jimenez has managed to hold on to this roster here. Now, what happens with him is TBD, but he's played well enough, right, to be able to stick around. They could have cut ties. Carter obviously walked here a couple of seasons ago, right? So there's going to be this evolution for the Giants. And the last thing I'll say here is it's becoming very interesting this offseason, away from the preseason game, but looking at training camp, looking at how guys are developing. I do wonder, right before the season, we're going to give our predictions, which guys are going to be breakout stars, etc. There are still a number of areas to circle here over this and next off season that the Giants and Joe Shane still have to flesh out. So I am starting to wonder about how hard has the gas been pushed by the New York Football Giants fan base, and are they ready, just in case, to still be steady as it goes if there are some lumps in the road here, because I think it's possible. Things need to go really well for a lot of guys this year in order for this to be another big building block for them. It's not me casting doubt. It's just casting a little bit of reality, right? Like, this isn't the finished Joe Shane roster. This is the next phase and evolution of that roster.
They're projected to have 7.5 wins this year. It better not be the finished product here. That they made the playoffs. They won a game. We need to see more progression from this team. You hope that Xavier McKinney can do it and he can be here long term. But I think Joe Shane's right to put the pause on it. Wait. Let's see where we go midway through the season and see if we can get him signed long term then.
By the way, that's Darian Beavers and Micah McFadden, two Joe Shane draft picks battling it out for an inside linebacker role. That's important. The cornerback position is Tre Hawkins and Deonte Banks and Cordell Flott, all Joe Shane draft picks, right? So these are a lot of the new young players that need to carve out roles for themselves. Get over to YouTube, guys, because that's where you can see all the videos and our beautiful faces. You get over to social media on Twitter at AndyMac214, at Adam Arbrecht, and at One Giant Podcast. And of course, until next time, we'll break down not only the rest of practice this week, but also preseason game number 2 against the Carolina Panthers, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.